Yeah. Hi, Tory.
Hi, Iggy,
Yeah.
Ignacio.
Yeah. Very, very good presentation. I've always been very confused about the concept or philosophy of money and how it works. And I tried to gather from your, get some more insight. The question I have is, from what I gather, is that everybody has to believe in whatever monetary, um, um, it could be dollars or sterling. They have to believe in it in order for it to work, correct? In the actual currency, right? So how does my question is, I never understood Bitcoin. How did is that the sort of same concept, Bitcoin? How does that factor in today's?
I think Bitcoin and digital currencies have arisen with the desire to do commerce on the internet, um, and um, and having those transactions be completely confidential and not traceable by tax authorities. And to do that, you have to create these very sophisticated keys, security keys for the transactions to go back and forth, undetectable, unsurveilled by other people. And so they've perfected this technology of private transactions, but I haven't seen it being used really it's not being used in a widespread fashion. It's really become a potential in the future. And the reason a lot of people have bought into it is that they're kind of like stockpiling gold. The people who buy gold in effect really is never a currency. It's sort of a security. It's an asset. It's just simply a financial asset, really. It's a physical thing, but it's a financial asset that people buy. And same thing with digital currency. People want to believe that it's going to happen, so they're stockpiling it. And then it's just like any market, it booms and busts depending on the belief that it's going to be a functioning currency. But it's not really being used as a currency for transactions. So I think there's kind of this there's sort of this misguided understanding of it.
Okay.
Personally.
But I think I get the picture. Yeah, you've enlightened me on it and educated me on it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you again. So Howard, I see Howard there, and I think you have to unmute Howard.
Yeah, how are you, Tory? I thought that was wonderful. I'm really sympathetic to sort of social constructivism, and I'm kind of really sympathetic to the role of language in ontology and creating social reality and individual reality and consciousness. So I love that stuff, and I love where you ended up too in terms of sort of reconfiguring macroeconomic systems, or trying to reconfigure macroeconomic systems into something more local. I also really like too how some of the sort of metaphysical dualisms get synthesized through kind of action and practice, which he suggests incorporate both the kind of ideational and the physical, or both the empirical and the rationalist. I was kind of noticing too what I maybe thought or misunderstood as a sort of Adam Smith aspect in terms of rational self-interest. And I noticed you used the word rational, or in kind of interesting ways. I mean, we can sort of acknowledge that what's deemed rational is circumscribed by social construction and power. Even just look at, let's say, the ultimate rationality of, let's say, of consuming meat, or of ecological degradation. So we have a lot of practices that we presume are rational, and we also presume that we're acting in rational self-interest, and yet from macro perspectives we can recognize that they're not rational at all for the very reasons that you articulate at the end. So I'm wondering how kind of Smith kind of informs informs your economic theory just in terms of the presumption that we're rational economic actors, given both power relations and social constructions, false social constructions, alternate facts, sort of the new paradigm of where you say, as you say, anything goes. You suggested too that kind of wacko ideas will ultimately meet resistance. And one hopes that's the case, but looking around, it seems not necessarily to be the case. But anyways, I'm throwing a lot at you. I guess maybe the center of my question has to do with Smith and the idea of rational self-interest or rational decision-making in the economic sphere.
Yeah, well, I would just say that in Smith's time, rationality had a very kind of narrow definition, or a very narrow understanding. People understood rationality in a very sort of simple way, as if almost as if it's a psychological aspect of somebody. Some people might be more rational than other people, and so forth. What has transpired since then is that, and rationality really is a key element here in economics, obviously, but in everything, science too. Rationality is kind of evolves in a certain way, and there's lots of flavors of rationality. And remember, the Greeks had a word logos that oftentimes we think of as rationality, but rationality comes from the Latin ratio, and the Romans and the Latin speakers translated the Greek word logos as ratio, and that's where we got rational. But the Greeks didn't really think of logos. Logos for the Greeks was a combination of word and thought, and forget about thinking whether the thought was like Plato's idea, these self-contained ideas, but it was just thought and word, and word and thought kind of was logos, and logos was a discursive way of thinking was discursive. You thought in a conversation, and even Plato would say, we don't understand anything. You can't say any knowledgeable thing without what a knowledge is an account in language of what you're describing, what you're understanding an object to be. Whatever object you're trying to understand, it's discursively understood with words and thought as sort of a uniform thing. It was Latin later that gave that name rationality, and so it's with the recent modern times, with the semiotic revolution, that we sort of distinguish language separately from thought, and got rid of Descartes' idea that Descartes not only had this duality, but he also thought that, and like a lot of the philosophers back then at his time thought, that we had these self-apparent, self-evident, fully contained ideas in our head. John Locke thought that, and Berkeley and so forth. And but that's not true. And so there's thinking. We got to know better what thinking is, and a lot of we got to sort of isolate the social conditioning that comes with learning a language and other ways of habitually interacting with other people, as distinct, as those kinds of things we learned, our language and our different living practices are sort of come up in our thinking, and that's where we get this rationality is kind of a social construction, And so, and as we develop, you know, our practices evolve, and you know, our economy grows, and we develop new technologies and live by different, you know, technological devices and this and that. So does our, you know, our rationality follows along with that. So it's not a fixed, you know, object rationality, and it's actually kind of an objective thing out there that we learn socially. You know, we're the more socially engaged, you could say, the more rational we become. And again, rationality is not just this unevolving promised land. It's like this evolving thing. So I don't know if that got to it, but because another thing, the Greeks did not have an individual word that specified language. They just had logos, and it meant language and thinking together. And since then, we've parsed those two things out, and we've taken the Latin word rational and kind of we've kind of we haven't quite parsed that out yet, but we kind of think all of these things are all meshed together, you know, when we're not thinking carefully about it.
Thanks.
Mario.
Hi, Tory. Thank you for your presentation. I was very interested. In fact, as I'm sure John Smith could tell you, my background in philosophy is almost zero, but I have taught for, God knows, for 40 years practically. I did history of economic thought. That was one of my areas of interest. So yeah. Necessarily you get intertwined kind of, you know, thing with philosophy. Yes, of course, I knew about Aristotle's distinctions, you know, from chromatistic and all that kind of stuff that you were talking about. But from the angle of economics here, and I really appreciate what you did there. It's just that there were some statements there that I was particularly interested in, and I'm quite unsure about them. Okay. To raise at least one of them right now, that I would like you to provide a little more clarity to that, at least for me here. And this has to do when you talked about money. I'm sorry, that time is what makes money useful, you said. Okay. Yeah. Then you went on from that, okay, which is that it allows us to move consumption onto the present in a sense. You know, now I really was kind of, you know, as I said, I didn't quite make sense of what you meant by that. Let me explain in what sense I would like to see it. For me, money is useful because in a sense, it's a claim on either present or future production that will be socially validated at the end. And this is why I would say a cryptocurrency isn't quite money at all because of that. Okay, as an example, when you're talking about earlier, when I forgot the person there had raised that question, and so I mean, to me, it's a claim, and it is obviously socially determined here at the end because it has to be validated in some way. Okay, and it has to be generally accepted. You know, we do it legally through legal tender and all kinds of stuff. Okay, but the point being here that it has to be a claim on something in the future that defines what it is presently, in a sense, for its usefulness. Now, if it's in that sense, then I understand. But if not, maybe you could clarify that.
Well, no, I agree with you, and that. Oh. But I would say that the claim on future production is, in part, a claim on future consumption. And so, in effect,
well, it's not a claim on it. I mean, you will engage in consumption. You see, like to me, consumption is something that we do rather than something out there that we will then be able to consume through the purchase, so to speak. I mean, it's just a language that we're using here that maybe I'm a bit confused about. You know, it's the way you're using it. I think the terminology.
Yeah. No, I hear you. Yeah, I may not. It's something that I've recently taken up, so I haven't really quite thought it all the way through. But there are, for example, people, ecological economists, you could classify them as, who are saying that, by basically, creating more and more debt through investment loans, we can extract more material, for production, and consumption. And so sort of that the capacity that money gives to bring that, to activate that production and consumption, which, there's some time elapsing before the final consumption takes place, but the investment happens now with new money created. And so that's why I'm saying it's a claim on the future.
Yeah, it's a debt, but that it's issued as a debt, okay? But it is a claim for that future production there. And by the way, you have to produce something in order to consume. Isn't that,
Exactly, right.
You're saying that there have to be. So it's a monetary production economy, as you were, elaborating earlier there, and very much so. I mean, I'm completely in that. I completely agree on that point. Yeah. It's just that it's the way you're kind of throwing things around here, which makes it, at least for me, wasn't quite kind of catching on, and especially this whole thing about consumption. I mean, obviously, consumption is an act of destroying or using whatever we have there. Okay, whatever we have has to be often, it has to be produced in a sense to make it useful. Yeah. Okay, not all the time, but most of the time, and therefore that's where money intervenes on the production side primarily. Okay, but it also allows us to be able to engage in the purchases, which is the exchange side of things. As the classical economists would say, that's fear.
Right. Well, I like Keynes's. He had two components to aggregate demand. Well, not two. What was it? To the consumption
and investment.
Yeah, and consumption and investment, but investment in real things. Forget about financial investment or money.
Yeah, I forgot financial.
But investment in real assets or products or materials or labor is, in a sense, part similar to consumption. In other words, consumption is sort of the end user consumer buying stuff, but an investment is a producer buying the sort of inputs to a production process. And so both, though, are, production and consumption are sort of, when you strip out the superordinate labels, production and consumption, they're essentially the same activity. And so, isn't that what Keynes, one of the things Keynes said, for example, there's two ways of looking at that. I didn't think it's not aggregate demand. What was it that he was saying? It's consumption, I guess. It's just consumption in general. There's investment and consumption.
Well, investment, the actual process has to be, the way he looked at it, there's an actual monetary side to it, but ultimately it is a process of accumulating actual assets, physical.
Yeah. Accumulation,
the kind of rate of accumulation over time. They will call that rate of investment, whatever you want to use the terminology. But I'm saying, and obviously that process, the production side uses up these things, or partly does. We use up part of the machine even, or if it is physical inputs that are transformed, they're being used up as well, to produce something else that is more useful on the consumption, at the ultimate consumption side here for individuals. So we're using up things all the time, in a sense. They're all being consumed, but at different rates and for different different reasons here, so to speak, you know.
Yeah.
So in that sense, yeah, and money intervenes, but as I said, it primarily intervenes. That's the side that the neoclassical economists do not talk about at all, which is the side of the, you know, the production side of things, that it's so critically important, which is both, and it's a social relationship in a different way than it is as a pure buyer and seller of goods, you know, which would be on the consumption, let's call it, quote unquote.
Yeah, yeah. Partly because it's buying employees and labor.
Well, yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
And what drives it is a different thing, though, primarily in this case, than it does if you consume, let's say, an apple or whatever, yeah, when buying. Again, also money comes into play there, but for very different reasons.
Well, good. Well, I appreciate that response. Yeah, like I say, I'm going to think about that.
Yeah, and before, if I can just weigh
Yes.
in on Mario's point just for a brief minute. Sorry to preempt you, Tanya. Was the point you were trying to make, the point that Mario was correcting, was something as simple as, if you have a monetary using economy, if you have the Bank of England, then all of a sudden you move to a different level of economic production than you did before, and that other systems are not capable of that level of production. This is without explaining why that is, right?
Yeah.
That's the task of guys like myself and Mario. But
Right.
was that is that your assertion?
Basically, that's correct.
Yeah, yeah. I just thought it was appropriate to come in there. Okay.
Yeah, Tanya.
Okay, money has become the new god, at least in North America, and capitalism facilitates that. Money drives everything. It drives how we handle climate change, how we handle healthcare, how we handle social welfare, how we handle education.
Yeah.
And we live in a world now where there are individuals wealthy enough to spend $44 billion buying Twitter and who can take joyrides up into space. And the wage gap is unbelievable. It just, and these inequalities are leading to such social unrest and anger. I think it really threatens the future of democracy. Democracy is in real trouble. And you talked at the beginning about theory of value and theory of justice being part of economic philosophy, if I remember correctly, how you stated it. And I wonder, I don't even know if there's a philosophical answer to what's going on in North America, but are there any philosophers who are trying to address some of these questions? I mean, I appreciate your concern about money as a communitarian, you know, option or bridge kind of, but if we don't solve what's going on in North America, democracy is doomed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I know it's a very kind of grim prospect that, and I don't have the answer, but you know, I think it's becoming aware or apparent among, you know, at least part of the economic establishment that extreme inequality represents is sort of a is not only the instability that's inherent to capitalism, but it's that instability and that extreme inequality is capitalism destroying itself. It can no longer function with that extreme inequality. You know, markets don't function when one party has massive purchasing power, or for that matter, massive productive power. You know, the best conditions is a much more evenly distributed wealth and income. That's when a monetary production economy functions the most efficiently, the most fairly, and so forth. But once it gets out of whack, it's really, you know, it's really in the state of imminent collapse. It can no longer, you know, it can no longer function. So, and maybe inflation is the sign of, you know, the sign of this for sort of disorder that starts happening. And there are economists along those lines who are doing that. In fact, I'd say Mario and John and others are well into that aspect. But Stiglitz and who's the guy at Berkeley, Robert Reich, and so on and so forth. Some of these people. Richard, Lou.
Thank you, Tory. Very good presentation. You really open new horizon for me to understand economy from philosophy. You mentioned digital currency. We know the digital currency, the topic of the character is decentralized, right? The digital currency, the typical character is decentralized. So I just guess, I'm so very low at the background of philosophy. So from the decentralized, this is the caricature. If I can connect with some connection, I mean the creation of the digital currency is also influenced by some contemporary philosophical school, such as some deconstructivism. Also, like you mentioned, some philosopher, Derrida, Foucault. I just curious about this things. That's my question.
You're asking a philosopher like Foucault, Michel Foucault?
Yeah, I mean the decentralized is also this phenomenon also influenced by some philosophy school, like the deconstruction, the school. I don't know.
Well, that kind of decentralization is more of it's happening more at the level of free individual thinking. Everybody is free to have their own truth, so to speak, Michel Foucault, or maybe different groups have their own truth. And how that really intersects with, say, a money economy. Certainly there's a sociology of inflation where different occupational groups, different sectors try to take and establish economic power over other groups. Like farmers might want to establish, floors or ceilings on commodities and ensure their income over others, or banks have their, it's a sort of a political legal battle of these different groups, or unions and public employee unions establish power. So there's sort of a decentralization in that sense, or to groups for legally ensuring their power over the other groups in this society. But I wouldn't call that the same kind of thing that Foucault or some of these constructionists, radicals would. That's not the same kind of decentralization, I don't think, that they're talking about, but maybe related.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. John.
Yeah, thanks, Tory. I made some notes here, but whether I'll actually be able to read what I've said is another thing. But the point I wanted to get back to is the point that Mario was raising and some others were raising, and I think has come up in both of your talks, the one in October and the one now. It's along the lines that what capitalism is, if we can use this loose term capitalism, is in fact monetary production. That's what it is, right? The Keynes said that, of course, right?
Yeah. It's a great, I think it's a beautiful, concise statement, even though it's evocative of a lot of different points. There's a lot of implications of monetary production.
Yeah, but i.e., at some level, capitalism would not exist without money, right? Marx said it too. M, C, M prime.
That's right.
Yeah, but Marx, of course, notoriously didn't do anything with that. He constructed an entirely sort of real, in a sense, version of the process.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to go on from that.
Yeah.
So capitalism inevitably involves money. You can't have capitalism without money, right? Therefore, in a sense, capitalism is a semiotic construct.
Yeah, exactly.
Like a created reality, if you will, which does not have to be, or something different could be, if you create a different reality. I'd like you to elaborate on that. The second point.
Well, it's money. You can create new realities with money.
With money. And one of the, I guess the way I'm putting it is, one of the new realities, therefore, was capitalism. In 1694, a new reality was created, founding of the Bank of England, something along those lines. I just want to see whether you.
I'd put the earlier with the Medici's and the northern Italian states. But go ahead.
No, that's fair. I just wanted to sort of draw you on that, like in a certain sense that.
Yeah.
The other point I would like to make, and I would like your reaction to it, and it sort of relates back to your point about, what we call it, the fact that the classical economists and the modern economists don't have the intellectual resources to deal with that system. I would say that the defenders of capitalism, libertarians, classical economists, contemporary neoclassical economists, do not in fact see capitalism in that way. They have no concept of Mario said before that that the neoclassicals don't understand. They ignore production in a certain sense. They just think
right.
that exchange.
That's right.
I don't know if Mario wants to come back in on this. And in a way, it's because of that problem that you said, the lack of intellectual resources dating back to modern philosophy, to be able to deal with it. In short, they just think of, economy as barter, physical exchange.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Production isn't there. That's why I wrote, the book, Beyond Barter. So I guess I would just like you to kind of draw those threads together, and listen, maybe Mario would like to elaborate as well on that.
Well, two things that come to my mind is, again, Keynes's phrase monetary production economy, and to the point you're making here, and also Mario's point that the neoclassical economists don't recognize production, they only look at trade. So it's, the neoclassical view only sees a money production economy as exchanging things that already exist, the things that are already owned by people. But the Keynesian view, or the understanding that money, creates new realities, and so to speak, like you were just saying, allows for this idea of producing new things that never existed before. Obviously we think of technology as being behind all that, but in a sense, that's what capitalism or monetary production allows, is this productive, Promethean capability of doing new things. And the second thing I would just add in there is I haven't been able to really disentangle the thinking about it, but the way productive activities are organized, and then pure technological innovation are not so separate as we might think they are. And that, again, with money, particularly helping this division of labor, this wide division of labor, everybody kind of specializes on, what they're really good at, and then, ideally gets paid for it so they can buy all the other economic needs they have from the other specialists. It's that organization of humans in doing all these specialized tasks that is really a technological innovation. You know, if you organize the activity right, it's as good as inventing a new cell phone or something like that. Technical innovation and organizational innovation, or just organization, allows for new productivity to be realized, and so there's not there's sort of a blend somewhere. I mean, obviously, new technology, like let's just say cell phones, we do a completely different kind of living practices from them. Or my background in supply chain logistics and using computer to computer enterprise resource planning systems, where one manufacturer's resource plan, production run planning system sends out an electronic purchase order to a supplier automatically, and it shortens the response time. There becomes it's that organization and that sending of signals that this sort of cybernetic way of organizing production. It's not just the telecom lines and the computers and the new computer software and this and that, the technology. It's all together, the organization and the technology. It's all one new kind of practice that comes about in the human economy and the labor practices and everything else. So there's not quite as a distinctive difference between technical development and new organizational practices of people doing activities. It's really merged a lot more than we think. So I think there's an intellectual clarification, theoretical clarification that could be done there. I just haven't done it.
Yeah, no, thanks. So Howard is next, actually, but I would, if you want to, Mario, I would like you to weigh in on that in just a moment. Hold in just a second. Then Howard,
Yeah.
and then Rick. Rick, you had a question earlier, and so after Howard, if you want, Rick, after Howard has finished, maybe you could ask your question that came from the beginning. Sorry, Mario, go ahead. I much appreciate hearing what you have to say.
Well, I mean, what you were, I'm not sure if I could add a lot more here, except, if you look at it historically, the way much of, mainstream thinking of money has always been, I think it was Karl Polanyi who used the term catalactic theory that comes from Mises. And the idea basically being here that money and trade are intertwined here. In fact, trade precedes money. So in a sense, you need to have barter exchange, right? And then money comes in and it makes the system, it's going to add the oil to grease, the wheels of trade here in a sense, okay? And make it easier to facilitate that exchange. So that's the whole basis of that theory of money. I mean, it has, as I said, it both preclude, in other words, trade must be there before money comes in almost, okay? But in fact, historically, that's not true at all. And in fact, the person who most developed this, and I found it amazing, if you read this stuff, is Karl Polanyi on that,
Yeah.
He made a real effort to go and dig up some very primitive economies to show how this kind of nature of money, as he conceived of it, which is more along the lines that we're talking about here, by the way, okay, was in fact way before they were even trading anything, and therefore there's other purposes to money, which is often a product, or a byproduct of the whole legal system and the social, kind of relations that are defined by that whole legal system as well. So it's in that sense that there are very, different conceptions here that have clashed historically. And in a sense, they still do today. I mean, when we debate, I don't know, whatever, like nowadays we're debating monetary policy. And boy, I couldn't believe how many idiots there are out there who are still professing monetarism. I mean, big times. In fact, I wrote a letter to one of my, well, John would know her, of course, Diane Bellemare at the Senate of Canada.
Yeah.
Because they invited this fellow, I forgot his name now, from the US, who was one of these students of Milton Friedman, and was telling them all about, the reason why we've had all this inflation again has to do with the fact that we've created too much money, chasing too few goods. And we're back to this kind of world again, which is the world, as I said, that goes to the whole nature of money. What do we mean? We would never argue that, but they will argue that somehow money is inflationary. What is inflationary is not that. There are many things going on there, but money is an endogenous thing. It's not some sort of thing that just falls from heaven, as a helicopter story or any nonsense or tale of that nature. But I mean, I'm going off the topic a little bit here, but just to say that many of the current debates even really go back to this fundamental issue of what we mean by money, which goes back literally to the origins of economics, for sure, okay? Because if you read many of these early writers, especially these Greek philosophers that you were referring to, that was the issue then, and it still remains that today, I would argue, in some fundamental way here.
Yeah, thanks. Polanyi was where I wanted you to go, and you did.
Oh, okay.
So that was good. Thanks very much. So Howard.
Hey, Mario, I was curious about what you said, and I didn't really understand, and maybe we can circle back to it later. What you said about money preceding trade. Is that right? Were you suggesting that there were sort of objects that had status?
No, well, money is debt. If
Sorry?
money is debt, we had debt that existed. If ever been to Paris and visited the Louvre, you will look at the Code of Hammurabi and all that stuff. You will see that they encrypted literally in the stone. They etched in the stone. Okay, these debts, and they circulated literally. Okay, so here we have circulating debt. What the heck is that? It's money, and even though they were not even trading among themselves.
Right.
Okay.
And that brings me to my second. I was going to ask. Tory mentioned sort of financialized markets, and I was thinking about sort of over financialized markets and sophisticated investment instruments that yield a return on investment that are increasingly abstracted and divorced from actual productive activity. And I'm wondering how that fits into your understanding of money as and the base of return on investment and its relation to productive activity.
Yeah. It's when you look at these derivatives, for example, that were created since since the 80s. The market capitalization of public markets, particularly in the United States, say in 1980, was essentially in 1980 was the market capitalization, the value in money, nominal value of all the stocks and I don't know if bonds were in there, but let's just say stock. No, it was bonds, stocks and bonds, all securities traded on the nominal value of those in 1980 were equivalent to 1 year of GDP of the US economy. And now with 40 years later, and it was particularly up to 2008, the capitalization of all financial instruments, stocks, bonds, and then derivatives off of those was about 10 times a year's worth of income of the United States. So in effect, using the same currency unit to specify these and create these sort of artificial derivatives, it became a much more fragile financial system. But in the run-up of the market boom, it was a very profitable it was profitable to certain, certain traders, but certainly there were equally losers in that game. So, but that's sort of, part of the, it's a complex adaptive system. Money systems are. There's the idea of market equilibrium is totally a myth. There's no the counteracting forces of buyers and sellers or competition or something doesn't really play into. I mean, Hyman Minsky, for example, the instabilities hypothesis of financial markets. These financial monetary system suddenly gets sidetracked into these sort of insurance contracts and other kind of derivative markets for financial instruments that aren't really productive in a real sense. And so that's just this, and to control that is a matter of laws and restricting people from doing things and or having backup reserves and this and that. There's 1,001 different laws that can contain that, but left to its own devices, people just start getting inventive and creative with different ways of using money, but then it takes people off the point of actual real production and just creating, sort of a easy money, so to speak. Again, money always is a claim onto real wealth, so that's the incentive to somehow make easy money. Speculating in a marketplace gives you the money that you can then turn into real wealth. So anyway, it's a complex adaptive system that has all these kind of unintended consequences, even with the money unit itself.
Yeah, and it seems kind of divorced from real economic activity and divorced from a theory of value as well, beyond generating wealth for, as you say, a certain sector.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, look, we're coming close to the end now, so I'll just see if there's any more. Thanks, Howard. We'll just see if there's any more questions. Rick, did you have a question that you wanted to ask? Okay, I'll take that as a no. So are there any more questions?
Yeah.
Last question. Okay, good. Well, Tory, on behalf of everyone, thank you very much for another excellent presentation, as indeed the last time.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thanks very much. Now, and thanks to everyone for participating this evening. I know we're cutting it a little bit fine, close to holidays and so forth, but we did have a lively discussion, and I'm glad that we did. Now, we're taking a break now for a little bit until January 22nd, I think. Ronan, you and Megan, I believe, are talking. Would you like to advertise that?
Yes. So myself and my daughter are going to present the philosophy of film. So hopefully you will all be here and, have a lot to say about it. Given that all of us watch films, I'm sure we'll have a lot of discussion about how films inform philosophical thought. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, excellent. And then in February, we've got Howard, Philosophy of Mind. Good stuff. Okay, well, thanks all, and thanks again, Tory. Good night, everyone. Happy holidays, happy new year before you see you. Thanks, everyone.